of psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
A new paper reveals more intelligent people are quicker to learn and unlearn.
90% chance that there's some weird animal out there.
Alan Stern's been doing this forever and far more extreme. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. Welcome, everybody. If you're joining us for the first time, a very special welcome to you, and thanks for coming back for more if you're one of our regular listeners. I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. We've got a great show for you. Our trending topic today is Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor? That's in our second segment. But first, let's meet our Charlotte panel, minus Frank, who's on vacation. Emma Kate Wright is here. Emma Kate, how do you feel about Frank not being in the room with you? Is it a better time, or is it tough on you?
It's great. No, really, it's like the best because normally he's roasting me or I'm roasting him, and so now there's just like mild roasting. Mild.
Just mild.
Mild.
Mm-hmm. Yep, mild
Nothing
salsa.
too rough.
Nothing crazy.
So, Emma Kate, when you were a kid, we're going to talk about Mr. Rogers, and he was before your time. When you were a kid, who did you watch on TV? Like, what shows, what personalities did you remember watching when you were a little kid?
So I'm going to say something that Mr. Rogers would have probably really hated, actually. I loved Ren and Stimpy and Rugrats and all the things that as I have learned, was kind of against. So Looney Tunes, like the really slapstick humor stuff. Yeah. And I think I watched some Sesame Street, but I really don't know, to be honest. I don't remember watching much of that.
And Jonathan Hedderly's also here. He's our certified Asian who rounds out the panel. And Jonathan, what did you watch when you were a kiddo on TV?
Well, we did not have many options for television channels because we did not have cable. And growing up close to the Canadian border, I actually watched a lot more of Canadian public television than American public television. So I don't even think I had access to watch Mr. Rogers. I watched Sesame Street a lot. And then there were two Canadian public television shows I watched. One was called Mr. Dress Up, which I think, Dave, quite honestly, you would have liked. Not going to lie. That feels like that's in your wheelhouse. And then
Mr. Dress Up.
Yeah, Mr. Dress Up. And then there was a show called The Littlest Hobo, which was about a German Shepherd dog that would ride on a train and get off and help people or solve mysteries and then just jump back on that train. The Littlest Hobo. I remember that show.
Do you remember there was a TV show that Morgan Freeman was on PBS? What was that? He was Mr. So-and-so on the show.
Reading Rainbow? I don't know.
The Reading Rainbow, that was it.
Was it? I don't know.
I think it was something like that. What I was thinking is I remember that when I was in public school, in elementary school, they would play public television. Mm-hmm. Like that would be like every day we'd watch, like the Electric Company and maybe Reading Rainbow. Maybe it was Electric Company. That's what it was.
It definitely was not Reading Rainbow, Dave. I'm pretty sure. It's not.
I don't know. I can't remember. I was in second grade at the time, so I don't really remember.
Well, what's funny is like one time my mom was telling me what my favorite show was, and she was like, and in kindergarten, Jonathan's favorite show was MASH. So like as a 5-year-old, I'm watching MASH while other kids are watching like DuckTales or other stuff. I guess I just needed my people in my life.
You did.
Yeah. It was like NYPD Blue or something like that. Yeah. Jonathan each week trolls the internet, and he finds a great story of psychology in the news for our first segment that we call
Being Human.
So Emma Kate, I'm going to talk to you right now, and then I'm going to talk to Dave. I'm not going to talk to Dave right now because he already knows this. But Emma Kate, a new study suggests you may be missing out on a number of mental and physical health benefits by choosing to rinse in the shower over a soak in the tub. In this new study, researchers from a bunch of Japanese universities, I'm not even going to try to pronounce a lot of them, examined whether there were health benefits of taking a bath instead of a shower. And it turns out there are. According to the study, the subjects that took baths for 2 weeks reported improved health and on skin conditions, decreased fatigue, stress, and pain. They also said using a bath instead of a shower stimulated various physical benefits. I bet it did.
Oh boy.
Researchers hypothesize this has to do with hyperthermic action, which increases body temperature, stimulates the metabolism, and eliminates metabolic waste products, ultimately causing the body to feel refreshed. So, David Verhagen, little Davy Verhagen, what do you make of this study that says taking a bath is so much better than taking a shower?
Well, I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'm going to say it. I think we looked this up one time. I am one of 2% of the adult population of the United States that takes a bath every day.
Aww.
I do. Now, I used to take a bath every morning because I get up very, very tired, and I would always worry that I would fall in the shower because I was so tired. Like I thought I would like fall asleep and like kill myself in the shower.
Help, I've fallen.
Right. I need a life alert. So I would take a bath. And now I don't do that. I do take a shower because there's only a shower in our part of off of our bedroom, and in the guest room, there's a bath. So in the evening, what I do, come home, pour a hot bath. Maybe if I'm feeling really
Randy?
kind of really randy,
Bubbles.
I'll throw a bath bomb in there or some Epsom salt or something crazy. And it's awesome. I read Entertainment Weekly, or a book.
That's
or
his
something.
bath porn.
For 15 minutes, take a bath, crack my back. It's a beautiful thing. It is a thing of beauty.
I thought you were about to say 50 minutes, and I was like, God, that would just be awful. Like how pruny you'd get, and like, eee.
Yeah, my skin would start falling off of me, and I know.
Now, Dave, I'm being honest. If you would turn this into a YouTube series, I think people would watch an old white man bathe for 15 minutes and reading Entertainment Weekly. It's called the exfoliating soaking experience.
It's like a rubber ducky.
I mean, there
floating by.
are Koreans that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars for people to watch them eat noodles. I think if you watch a pruny man get prunier, like that's gold, Jerry. Gold, I tell you.
I'll do it. If I can make $100,000 just from soaking in the bath every day, I'll do it.
Well, okay, but bringing it back to the research here, there are some actually really awesome benefits for taking a bath, and I think some of this goes with stress relief is a big one, because when you're in the bath, and Dave probably can, he's very connected, got all of his technology.
I'm very connected.
That, just having something, little magazine to read and unplug is really soothing. And then, if you exercise a lot, doing Epsom salts or other things like that helps loosen up those stiff muscles.
We know Dave doesn't exercise a lot,
well,
so that does not
we're not
into this
needing to
equation.
point that out, because we know Dave is very stable, especially given his earlier comment about worrying he's going to fall in the bath or in the shower.
Dave's description is unripped for his pleasure.
Right.
He is not a toned man.
Oh, goodness. But yeah, so there are actually, there's lots of great things about baths. People should take a bath every once in a while.
Well, Dave, it's funny that you're afraid to fall asleep in the shower and fall. In high school, I would fall asleep in the shower. I would be standing, taking a shower in the morning, and then all of a sudden I just sort of like jolt myself awake, and I was standing up and 30 minutes had passed, and I had no recollection of that. No. So my senior year in high school, I had 39 absences.
What?
And a lot of them had to do I was late for school because I fell asleep standing up in the shower.
I acted surprised, but now I'm like retracting that, and it makes sense.
Makes complete sense.
Well, I'm going to vouch for this study. There are lots of benefits to taking a nice hot bath, getting a nice hot bath. Lots of psychological benefits. So I encourage you to do it. And if you do, we want to hear from you. We want your questions and comments.
Send in
you
your
can write
pictures.
us.
Don't.
No pictures, though.
Please.
No pictures.
Send in your visual comments.
No.
Write us with no pictures, text only at feedback@shrinktank.com. All right, let's shift gears to our trending topic. And we're going to talk about the Mr. Rogers documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor? We've all seen it. I want to get your impression of the documentary first, then we're going to talk about some of the content and talk about the man himself. But Emma Kate, what's your take on this documentary?
Okay, so it was a very solid, feel-good movie. And I have to say this because Frank is not here. This movie would have been completely ruined had he gone to the film with us. Seriously.
Why?
Because he would just, there were a couple of scenes where I feel like he would have just made some sort of really inappropriate comment, or like it is like not even a funny thing. Like he would just find a way to try to make it weird or whatever.
Because it's sentimental and he can't deal with
and
the
it would
emotion
make
of it.
him uncomfortable to think about, who are the helpers in his life. And, he couldn't have handled that.
Like his accountant.
Right. So, but I enjoyed Cal. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, that's definitely
his
helper for sure.
That's his hamburger helper.
But it was seriously though. I really loved this film. It was well done. I learned a lot about Mr. Rogers. Like I said earlier, I didn't watch his show, and I really liked it.
Jonathan, what's your take on the documentary?
Well, I went into it as basically somebody that has no emotional connection to Mr. Rogers. I didn't watch it growing up, so I was sitting next to Julie, and even when the documentary started and it started playing his theme song, she started singing, she started humming, and I'm like, I don't know what you're doing. Like there's nothing in my brain about this. So from a non-nostalgic standpoint, I think it's a really, really good documentary. I think unlike last week when we talked about the Robin Williams documentary, this opened up a lot of information and insight into the man, into the show, into the politics surrounding that era. And I just found it fascinating simply on a documentarian level, on dissecting a man and then his understanding of child development and television entertainment. I thought it was really, really good.
I loved it. I thought it was one of the best movies of the year so far. Probably will be on my top 10 list for the end of the year. One of the best documentaries I've seen in several years, and it succeeds on every level. It succeeds as a documentary. It succeeds as just an understanding of this man, an understanding of that era, and it really is just like the perfect movie for these times. It just the themes in the movie are exactly what we need. This is a really exceptional movie. So I was thrilled. And I'm actually beginning to incorporate it into some of my speaking because I'm talking to a lot of schools and young adults and talking about the importance of kindness and that kind of thing. So with that, let me ask you guys, what are some of the things that really struck you about the documentary itself? Some of the themes that came out, some of the aspects of Fred Rogers' character that really hit you in particular. Emma Kate? So,
one of the things that really stood out was just the authenticity of Mr. Rogers and who he was. He, his background was he went to seminary, and his television show was really his way of preaching to try and get out this idea of love and empathy and good values and caring for your neighbor. Some of the stuff that he did was just radical at the time. During integration, a lot of issues with African Americans swimming in pools with Caucasians. And so he had one of the African Americans on his show get in a little kiddie pool and they washed their feet together. And he was just, really pushing the envelope on a children's show. That, and then, I kept thinking after I saw this film how someone like Mr. Rogers probably can't exist now because we would just find a way. The media would just find a way to rip him apart, whatever little flaw he may have had that we don't know about, or, maybe he's made mistakes because, again, we're all human, but that would have been exploited in this day and age. And so his legacy maybe couldn't exist today is what I took away.
And you said stuff earlier about him going to seminary and this being a way of him sharing his faith and preaching, in a sense, the show. And it struck me of how much of a counterpoint it was to an earlier show we did a couple weeks ago about how the evangelical church has kind of slid off the rails and how what's gone on there. And this was really a depiction of faith that was authentic and very compelling, very, very appealing. I think that was just a really interesting and important contrast.
And relatedly, one of the things that I love that this documentary did was they tried to disprove some myths, because so many people just couldn't fathom that Mr. Rogers was truly who he was, where there's, I guess, one rumor about him being a Navy SEAL. And even, my fiance was talking about that, and it was like, oh yeah, he wears the sweater to cover up all of his tats. And it's like, no, like he really is just who he is. So
all that muscle that Mr. Rogers has, right?
That's why I wear these shirts.
That's right,
yes,
Dave.
To cover the tats.
That's right.
Cover the tats and the muscle,
yes.
all that. Jonathan, what was your take from the documentary that really struck you?
Well, you guys both touched on this. Like, the television was his pulpit, but the message was one about loving your neighbor. So he really took a populist and a humanist sort of theology, because it was really centered around the dignity of other people, the dignity of everyone. And for him, he specifically attached that to children and how to not condescend or talk down to them. But that's really, if we want to bring that to modern context, that would really resonate with the dignity of all people. And that really was what Mr. Rogers was about. The other thing that really struck me was it would show like his wife, one of his, some of his closest friends and children talked, and what you saw on the television screen was Mr. Rogers. That's who he was. So, like, I personally find it really quirky, maybe a little weird, but it was sincere. He was just being himself, because he truly believed that's how you're going to make a connection with another human being, is allow them to be themselves, and to you approach them being who you are, and you'll make a connection. Like, I don't think I would have ever connected. I mean, this is all speculative. I don't think I would have connected to the show itself as a kid, but I can certainly appreciate and respect what it was attempting to accomplish.
Well, what struck me about that, what you're saying, is I found myself having to turn off the psychologist part of my brain while I was watching it. Last week we talked about Robin Williams, and I was all filtering it through a lens of addiction, mental health, all the Parkinson's, Lewy bodies, dementia stuff. This time, I found myself early on trying to make sense of this guy from a lens of like, is he just a weird guy on the spectrum? Is it just like, what is the, and I just realized he's just a rare person. Like, he's just a genuinely kind person. And it's so much so that he's just a rare, it doesn't serve it to think of it from a lens of how do we, I don't even mean diagnose, but just even understand him. It's just, there's an authenticity about him that I think is rare.
Yeah, that authenticity and quirkiness going together, I think, is probably about 90 to 95% of the explanation. The one tidbit in the documentary that stuck out to me, and I think it was his wife that commented on this, that both of them grew up in homes where emotion, especially negative emotion, was not allowed. And so to me, I think when one of his sons later commented, like, when we had to have a serious talk or there was something maybe more, severe, I don't know if it's the right word, he would go into a voice. He would go into a childlike voice. And is that one of the ways that that was the safest way for him to express and address strong, maybe even negative emotions? To me, that was a really interesting tidbit that they threw in there.
Yep.
Emma Kate hit on this earlier, but what also hit me about this documentary and about Fred Rogers in watching it was how radical and subversive, in a sense, it was without you even realizing it. Like, once you see it in its historical context, you realize, man, this guy was pretty radical. He was talking about issues of race during times when they were kicking black people out of public pools, and he was making a point of putting his feet in a pool with a African-American guy. They were talking about assassination.
Yeah.
Even use that term after Robert Kennedy got assassinated. They're talking about divorce when the divorce rate skyrocketed. They're talking about these very important things that were affecting the culture and being very direct in it. And an underlying message of kindness and worth and value that was underneath that. MK, what did that stuff strike you in the same way?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, he was trying his best to explain really complicated, tough adult things that kids were getting exposed to in those times in a way that kids could wrap their head around it and process it and make it less scary. And even then, you know, he was the person where, like, after the show was off the air, like, he did a, you know, like a PSA kind of thing during 9/11. I mean, he was that person that, you know, the country kind of turned to, well, what's Mr. Rogers say about this tragedy or about this, you know, complex social issue? And I just think that is incredible because and even then throughout all this, like, he never really attempted to, like, push, you know, he was pushing his values and beliefs, but it wasn't in your face where it felt like you were going to kind of react opposite.
Yeah. And that approach, I think, we've gotten away from a lot of it in today's culture and with the media, because basically he tried to help kids understand things by addressing it with them versus shielding it from them, keeping it from them. And I think he found a good balance between our role as adults and parents is to protect you, but it's not to just pretend these things aren't happening and keep you in a bubble completely removed from the realities of life. Whereas today, there's so much of wanting to protect and shield young people from the realities of life that I think that we've gone too far in that direction, that we're doing them a disservice.
And that brings up a point, is that it's almost impossible to understand Mr. Rogers without understanding where the country was historically in regard to children and adults. And there's a cyclical nature to how we as a culture think about kids, and it goes from being, we pay a little bit of attention to them, then we pay too much attention and become overly controlling and overly protective. Then we realize we're getting out of balance and we back off, and then we back off too far, and then we kind of step back in again, and it creates this sort of like a wheel, like a cycle. And right now we're in a time of life where we're overly focused on kids, to the point of being overprotective, being, you know, helicoptering and all that stuff. That's the flaw and the fault of our current culture in regard to children. But at the time, back in the 60s and 70s, it was the opposite. The focus at that time was on adults and adult well-being. And that's why the message was, hey, you know, if you want a divorce, your kids will be fine. They're resilient. They're okay. The divorce rate skyrocketed. People sort of pursued their own agenda. There was all kinds of things going on that was about adult kind of self-actualization and well-being. And really, kids were kind of left behind a little bit in that era. And here in the middle of that is Fred Rogers saying to kids, I want to talk to you about important things. I want to talk to you about scary things. And you're important and you have value. So that was especially powerful to see the context of Mr. Rogers as well. Any last thoughts about Mr. Rogers himself or the documentary, or anything particularly about what we should take from it today and what it means for us today? Emma Kate, last thoughts.
I guess the thing that, you know, again, I didn't really have much perspective with Mr. Rogers, but it has just been everywhere I go, everything I've read online, it talks about somebody making, you know, a personal connection with him in their own way. You know, I read a story about this little blind girl who used to listen to the show, and at one point he had mentioned that he had some fish, and then she was concerned about what are the fish being fed. And then every day moving forward in the show, he would say, I'm feeding the fish just for that girl to know. And, you know, just, you know, people going up to him, just sending an email and him responding. It seemed like again, it was his pulpit. It was his mission. And he did everything he could to help people feel connected to him. And that is so powerful.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is decency, kindness, dignity, they never go out of fashion. And so even if somebody wants to say that those types of values are quaint or outdated, they really aren't. They can make all the difference from a newborn and infant to somebody in their 60s and 70s. Everybody's life is going to be better if they have experience of kindness and warmth, and that if they share it to somebody else. And that may sound like a very Hallmark type of fortune cookie sentiment, but it just is true.
Yeah, I feel like we can't overstate that, the importance of kindness, particularly in this era. We just are in an era where people are not kind to each other. They're not. And they're not kind in social media. And what's been especially shocking is we understand social media, people not being kind because there's a little bit of anonymity or a little bit of a distance with it. But now we're seeing over and over again videos, just one after another every day, of people treating each other with a fundamental lack of kindness. And so I think the need to be kind comes out of this loud and clear. So we highly recommend Mr. Rogers, Won't You Be My Neighbor? Go see it, please. We hope you do. All right. We're going to wrap it up with our final segment that we call our Doctor's Orders. These are things that we're personally enjoying in popular culture. So Emma Kate, you start.
Well, you just recommended it, but I gotta say you have to see it. You have to see Won't You Be My Neighbor? And I'm sorry that, it's redundant, but the reality is this was such a well-done movie, even without having a strong background on Mr. Rogers. I loved it.
It's
Check it
the
out.
make-out date movie of the summer.
Not quite.
Probably is.
Not quite.
Show me a little kindness.
Jonathan, how about you?
Well, one of my favorite bands is The National. And 11 years ago in 2007, they came out with what I think is their best album. It's called Boxer. And recently, they dropped an album of Boxer live in Brussels, where they play the entire album live. And we're talking a lot about the context of Mr. Rogers and our current times. It's really interesting. When the band wrote the album Boxer, it was really in the throes of the Bush administration and the Iraqi war. But 11 years later, it takes on some extra nuance currently with the Trump administration, with song titles such as Fake Empire or Start a War. So I highly recommend you check out The National, their original album Boxer, or their newest release Boxer, live in Brussels.
And I'm going to give a qualified recommendation to the new Sacha Baron Cohen series, Who is America? My qualified recommendation is, I think it's uneven. Some segments work and some don't, but the ones that do really work and they really hit hard. Some of them are very funny. He's got, instead of like just one Borat character, it's like he's created 4 new characters, 3 or 4 that he interviews different people, and it's not just slamming conservatives or slamming liberal. It's just, I think what he's trying to do in this is to expose people on all extremes and how people have just gotten nutty in their thinking. And he's been able to do that pretty successfully, at least for the starting episodes. So I will say not everything works in the series, but the things that work are really worth watching. So Who is America? Sacha Baron Cohen on Showtime. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. We hope you'll check out shrinktank.com for great articles and videos, and you can also find links to our Doctor's Orders products. Follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. For questions or comments, drop us a note. Our email is feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck, and our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. For Emma Kate Wright and Jonathan Hedderly in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.
Shrink Tank.com